There is an uprising to report from Iran after a 20-year-old woman, Masa Amina, died in police custody, her death sparking major blowback and even calls of death to the dictator. Demonstrators taking to the streets in Tehran and across the nation demanding an investigation into her death. She died after the country's so-called morality police detained her improperly wearing a hijab. Activists say she was beaten to death. Police claim she had a heart attack. In the protests, many university students were seen removing their headscarves, while others burned the garment, which has become a symbol of the oppressive regime. Some protesters were killed by the police. Joining me now is Myra Yazdari, host of our CWN Farsi program. Myra, great to have you on the broadcast. So how are these protests different from those in the past?
George, thanks for having me. Well, it's important to pay attention to what people are chanting. They are chanting, as you mentioned, death to the dictator, death to Khamenei. So the murder of Mahsa Amini evoked the nation's emotion. They thought it could be me, myself, it could be my sister, it could be my mother, it could be, my wife. So they really are angry. They took to the street, and we see that people are fighting back. People are pushing the police forces back, and we see the suppression is really brutal. We have many names of who was killed. They lost their lives, including Amin Maroufi from Urmia, 16-year-old. Another girl is Ghazale Chelavi, 33-year-old. She was shot in her forehead from a very close distance, and she was from northern Iran. We know that numbers are much higher, but families are threatened to be quiet, to not just give their names, whether they are killed or they are arrested.
Real quickly, last 30 seconds, there is a growing church in Iran. And why are so many people coming to Christ?
Because they are fed up. They are tired of this Islamic government that has been suppressing them by Sharia law, by Islamic law. So they see that what real Islam look like, and they don't want it. They say, we don't want it. We don't want the Islamic.
And they're fed up with it.
Yes, and they're fed up with it. And as we know, Iranian underground church is the first growing church in the world.
Yeah, okay, terrific. Myra, thank you so much for coming on the broadcast. I appreciate it.
Amid deadly protests across Iran, with thousands of Iranians demanding an end to the tyrannical Ayatollah regime, the Islamic Republic's top diplomat Hossein Amir Abdullahian is now threatening the United States that support for protesters' rights will not go unanswered, accusing Washington of trying to weaken Iran's stability. And while the United States calls upon the Ayatollah regime to listen to the protesters instead of firing at them, Washington is also enabling the private sector to prevent Iranian authorities from blocking the internet to the outside world, alongside imposition of limited sanctions against the so-called morality police, which was responsible for the death of Mahsa Amini, who was reportedly beat to death for failing to wear a headscarf properly.
We're doing two things. As we were talking about in the context of this general license, we are taking steps that we can to facilitate the ability of the Iranian people to communicate with one another, to communicate with the rest of the world, essentially doing what we can to support the peaceful aspirations of the Iranian people for greater levels of freedom and for the respect of rights that are universal to them. At the same time, we have held to account, and we will continue to hold to account those Iranians who are responsible for acts of violence, for acts of repression against their own people. Of course, the sanctions that we issued on Thursday of last week, the sanctions against so-called morality police and 7 other individuals, those are not the first human rights sanctions we've levied against Iran, they will not be the last human rights sanctions we levy against Iran.
Meanwhile, Iranian citizens continue to flood the streets of towns and cities throughout the country, demanding an end to the tyrannical Ayatollah regime. According to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, which monitors the developments in Iran, a brutal crackdown has been employed by the Ayatollah regime's security forces.
We at the UN Human Rights Office are very concerned by the continued violent response by security forces to protests in Iran, as well as communications restrictions affecting landline and mobile usage, the internet, and social media platforms. Thousands have joined anti-government demonstrations throughout the country over the past 11 days. Security forces have responded at times with live ammunition. Due in part to the restrictions on telecommunications, it is difficult to establish the precise number of casualties and arrests. On the 24th of September, state media put the number killed at 41. Non-governmental organizations monitoring the situation have reported a higher number of deaths, including women and children, and hundreds injured across at least 11 provinces.
While reports emerging out of Iran have indicated severe internet disruptions, Western governments, including the United States in particular, opted to remove regulatory obstacles related to sanctions, effectively enabling private companies to facilitate internet connectivity throughout the Islamic Republic.
What we are doing, I'll lay out a couple of actions that we have taken as it relates to the internet. On September 21st, the Iranian government cut off, as you know, access to the internet for most of its 80 million citizens as courageous Iranians take to the streets to protest the death of Mahsa Amini. The United States is taking action to support the free flow of information to the Iranian the Iranian people specifically, more broadly. On September 23rd, which was this past Friday, the Department of Treasury issued an updated general license that will increase support for internet freedom in Iran and authorize technology companies to offer the Iranian people more options of secure outside platforms and services. With these changes, we are helping the Iranian people access tools that are better equipped to counter the Iranian government's effort to surveil and censor them as well.
The White House press secretary further highlighted Washington's unwavering support for the citizens of Iran.
Turning to northern Iraq, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps executed deadly strikes on the northern Kurdistan region in a seemingly deliberate attack aimed at deflecting some of the mounting tensions and growing public unrest throughout Iran. Here's Alice Rizzo of Reuters with more.
Iran's Revolutionary Guards fired missiles and drones at militant targets in the Kurdish region of neighboring northern Iraq on Wednesday. At least 9 people were killed and many more wounded in the attacks near Erbil and Suleimania in Iraqi Kurdistan, according to its health minister, Saman Barzanchi. He also said that some of the wounded were in critical condition and that the death toll could rise. The strikes were reported after Iranian authorities accused armed Iranian Kurdish dissidents of involvement in unrest now shaking Iran, especially in the northwest, where most of the country's population of over 10 million Kurds live. After the attack, the Revolutionary Guards, Iran's elite military and security force, said that they would continue targeting what it called terrorists in the region. Iraq's foreign ministry condemned the attacks and said it considers this action as a violation of sovereignty.
It is important to note that the U.S. Military Central Command, CENTCOM, intercepted one of the Iranian drones, insisting that it had been on a trajectory which threatened American forces and civilian lives.
This is not the first time that we have seen Iran use these tactics, ballistic missiles and drones, but we are going to continue working with our partners in the region to help them defend against these types of threats.
It is also critical to underline that Mahsa Amini, the young woman whose murder by the Islamic Republic's so-called morality police sparked global protests against the tyrannical regime in Tehran, was a member of the Kurdish minority in the country.